My name is Ethan, I'm 32, and for most of my adult life, I've been what you might call the reliable, background character in my wife's family portrait. I'm a software developer, a father to an incredible 15-year-old girl named Lily, and a husband to a woman I love more than anything, Sarah. But to her family, I was just the quiet, unassuming guy who fixed their Wi-Fi and never caused any trouble. That all changed with a single phone call, a call that was meant to put me in my place but instead triggered a chain of events that would expose a decade of secrets and lies. My mother-in-law, Susan, called me directly, a rare event in itself. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind of tone that always preceded an uncomfortable request. But this wasn't a request. It was a decree. She informed me, with practiced regret, that my daughter Lily and I were being uninvited to my sister-in-law Jessica's upcoming wedding. The reason? They were curating a very specific guest list. It was, in her words, for deletes only, a gathering of successful, high-status individuals who would reflect well on Jessica and her new husband. The implication was painfully clear: a humble developer and his teenage daughter simply didn't make the cut. The silence on my end of the phone was heavy. I could hear her breathing, waiting for me to argue, to protest, to be hurt. But all I felt was a cold, clarifying calm. They had no idea who they were talking to. They had no idea what I had built while they were busy looking down on me. They thought they were shutting me out, but they were about to find out they were the ones who had been living in the dark. Before I continue and tell you exactly how I attended that wedding, not as a guest, but as the one person they couldn't possibly ignore, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment below if you have ever been underestimated or made to feel like you weren't good enough by the very people who should have been lifting you up. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know what it's like to be the family scapegoat, because this story is for you. To understand the sheer, delicious irony of that phone call, you have to understand the world I married into 10 years ago. When I first met Sarah, it was like a breath of fresh air. She was kind, intelligent, and saw me for who I was, not for what my job title or bank account said. Her family, however, was a different ecosystem entirely. They operated on a clear and unspoken hierarchy, and at the very top, shimmering like a flawless diamond, was her younger sister, Jessica. Jessica was the golden child. From the moment I was introduced, it was obvious that the family's world revolved around her. While Sarah was praised for her stability and gentle nature, Jessica was lauded for her spark. This spark usually manifested as wildly impulsive and financially catastrophic decisions, but to her parents, Robert and Susan, it was just proof of her ambitious, artistic soul. I remember one of our first family dinners together. Jessica, then 22, announced she was dropping out of her business degree program to start a high-fashion pet clothing boutique. My father-in-law, Robert, who presented himself as a savvy, no-nonsense businessman, beamed with pride. "That's my girl," he boomed, always thinking outside the box. He co-signed a loan for her, and 6 months later, when the boutique inevitably failed, leaving a trail of debt and unsold miniature dog tuxedos, there was no lecture. There was only sympathy and another infusion of cash for her next venture, becoming a lifestyle influencer. My role in this family drama was quickly established. I was the reliable, boring, but useful son-in-law. I was a junior developer at the time, working hard at a respectable but unremarkable tech firm. I was saving money, planning for a future with Sarah, and living a life that was, in their eyes, utterly devoid of glamour. I was the one who drove everyone home when they'd had too much wine at dinner. I was the one who spent a whole weekend migrating 10 years of their family photos from a dying computer to a new one, a task for which I received a distracted thanks. But once, Robert took us all out to a fancy steakhouse to celebrate Jessica getting 1,000 followers on Instagram. When the bill came, he made a great show of patting his pockets before declaring with a theatrical sigh that he'd left his wallet in his other jacket. Every eye at the table, including Susan's and Jessica's, swiveled to me. I paid the $500 bill without a word. They never paid me back. It wasn't the money that bothered me, it was the expectation. I was the family safety net, the stable ground they could all stand on while they reached for the stars, but I was never considered one of them. I was useful, but I wasn't elite. While my in-laws were busy funding Jessica's revolving door of failed dreams, I was quietly building a new world in the dark. My day job paid the bills and allowed Sarah and me to live comfortably, but it didn't ignite my passion. My real work began after Lily was asleep and Sarah had gone to bed. I'd retreat to my small home office, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, and I would code. For years, I had been mapping out an idea, a productivity and project management application designed specifically for small, independent creative teams. It was born from my own frustrations with the clunky, overpriced software on the market. I called it Nexus. The project became my obsession. Every spare moment was poured into it. Weekends weren't for brunch or relaxing, they were for debugging complex algorithms. Nights weren't for sleep, they were for refining the user interface until it was seamless and intuitive. In this solitary endeavor, I had one crucial ally, Mr. Henderson. He had been my first manager, a grizzled veteran of the tech industry who had retired a few years prior. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had seen potential in me that my in-laws never did. When I showed him my early prototype, he didn't pat me on the back and offer empty platitudes. He grilled me for 2 hours, poking holes in my logic, questioning my monetization strategy, and challenging every assumption I had. At the end, he leaned back in his chair, a rare smile cracking his stern face, and said, "Ethan, this isn't just good. This is necessary." He didn't give me money, but he gave me something far more valuable, his time and his brutal honesty. He became my mentor, my sounding board. Sarah, of course, was my rock. She was the one who brought me coffee at 2 in the morning, who listened patiently as I rambled about server architecture, and who never once doubted me, even when I was plagued with insecurity. We made a pact. We wouldn't tell her family about Nexus. It wasn't out of spite, not at first. It was for self-preservation. I didn't want their dismissive judgment if it failed, and I certainly didn't want their entitled interference if it succeeded. For 2 years, it was our secret. The initial launch was quiet. I uploaded it to a few platforms with zero marketing budget. The first month, I had 50 users. The next, 500. Then, a popular tech blog wrote a small, favorable review. The day that review was published, I hit 10,000 users. The month after, 100,000. The revenue, at first a trickle, became a steady stream, and then a river. I was able to quit my day job to focus on Nexus full-time, hiring my first few employees. All the while, to the outside world, and especially to Sarah's family, nothing had changed. We still lived in our modest suburban home. We drove the same reliable cars. I was still just Ethan, the computer guy. We were banking every dollar, reinvesting it into the company, building our silent empire while they remained completely, blissfully, and arrogantly unaware. The aftermath of that phone call from Susan was an exercise in synchronized gaslighting. After I hung up, my mind strangely clear, I walked into the living room where Sarah was reading. I told her, word for word, what her mother had said. The color drained from her face. She snatched her phone and dialed her mother immediately. I could only hear her side of the conversation, a rising tide of disbelief and fury. "What do you mean it's a misunderstanding? You told my husband he and my daughter aren't elite enough for Jessica's wedding. How could you possibly say that to him?" "To Lily." There was a pause, and I saw Sarah's shoulders slump. Her mother was working her magic. "No, he's not being too sensitive. You banned a 15-year-old girl from her own aunt's wedding because you're trying to impress a bunch of strangers." She ended the call, shaking with a rage I had rarely seen in her. She said I was twisting her words, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She said they just wanted a more adult, sophisticated atmosphere and that Lily would be bored anyway. And that you should understand how much pressure Jessica is under. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, designed to make us feel like we were the unreasonable ones. The next phase of the attack came via the family group chat. Jessica, who had remained silent until now, posted a photo of her ridiculously expensive wedding invitations with the caption, "Finalizing the guest list is so hard. You want everyone there, but we're really aiming for a certain vibe." Quality over quantity. It was a direct shot, and she knew it. Dozens of gushing replies from cousins and aunts poured in, all of them oblivious to the subtext. But we weren't. Then came the most audacious part of all. 2 days after uninviting me, my mother-in-law Susan called Sarah again. This time, her tone was conspiratorial, as if they were two reasonable women dealing with a difficult situation. She talked about a minor crisis with the wedding planning. The custom ice sculpture vendor required a 50% deposit, and Jessica's fiancé, a trust fund kid named Chad whose only discernible skill was spending his parents' money, was a little short this month. Susan then asked, in a casual, offhand manner, I don't suppose Ethan could just help us out with a little bit. Just to tide us over. It would be such a help to your sister. Sarah was speechless. I was sitting right there, listening on speakerphone, a grim smile spreading across my face. They had the audacity to ban me from their elite event and then, in the same breath, ask for my money to fund it. The entitlement was so pure, so potent, it was almost impressive. Sarah found her voice. Absolutely not, she said, her tone like ice. You can't have it both ways, Mom. You don't get to treat my husband like dirt and then view him as your personal ATM. You're on your own. She hung up, and the house was quiet again. The battle lines had been drawn. They thought they had all the power, but they were about to learn a very hard lesson about what true power, and true class, really looked like. The day of the wedding arrived, a crisp Saturday in October. There was no sadness in our house, no sense of being left out. Instead, there was a quiet hum of anticipation. Lily, my daughter, had been hurt by her grandmother's initial cruelty, but her mother and I had spent the past weeks reassuring her. We explained that some people measure worth in strange, shallow ways, and that their judgment was a reflection of their own insecurities, not her value. To make the day special for her, I had arranged for a private helicopter tour of the city, followed by dinner at her favorite restaurant, the kind of place she loved not because it was fancy, but because they had the best calamari. While they were getting ready for their elite gathering, Lily and I were soaring above the skyline, her face pressed against the glass, her laughter filling the small cabin. It was perfect. Meanwhile, Jessica had chosen her wedding venue with meticulous care. It was a place called the Apex, a stunning, state-of-the-art event space on the top 2 floors of the newly constructed Polaris Tower, the city's most prestigious new piece of architecture. It was sleek, modern, and notoriously expensive, the perfect backdrop for the image of success she wanted to project. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my company, Nexus Technologies, had relocated its headquarters 3 months prior. We were now the anchor tenant of the Polaris Tower, occupying 10 floors. And as part of the landmark leasing deal, my company had also acquired the holding firm that owned and operated the building's event spaces, including the Apex. At approximately 4 p.m., an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, my in-laws and Jessica were in a frantic meeting with the venue's general manager, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright. There was an issue. The final payment for the venue, a substantial 5-figure sum, had not been cleared. Chad's promised wire transfer hadn't materialized. As their hushed, panicked argument escalated, Ms. Albright held up a hand. I'm sorry, she said calmly, but there's no flexibility on this. I'll have to check with the owner of the building on how to proceed. She made a call. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors chimed and I walked into the reception area, flanked by Sarah, who held my hand tightly. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. I nodded to Ms. Albright. What seems to be the problem? I asked, my voice calm and professional. The scene was frozen in time. Robert's jovial face went slack, his mouth hanging open. Susan let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her chest. And Jessica, she just stared, her face a mask of pale, horrified disbelief. It was as if their brains couldn't process the image in front of them, me, the boring, unimpressive son-in-law, standing there as the clear and present authority in their meticulously crafted fantasy world. The silence was deafening. The shock that had frozen them in place began to thaw, replaced by a frantic scramble to recalibrate reality. My father-in-law, Robert, was the first to recover, his businessman persona kicking in like a faulty defense mechanism. He forced a hearty, booming laugh that echoed unnaturally in the tense space. "Ethan. My boy. What on earth are you doing here?" He slapped his knee as if this were all a hilarious prank. "Keeping secrets, are we? Buying up skyscrapers? You sly dog." He was trying to frame it as a charming little surprise, to absorb me back into the family narrative where he was the patriarch presiding over his successful flock. Jessica, taking her cue from her father, immediately shed her look of horror and replaced it with one of dazzling, predatory warmth. "Oh my God, Ethan, this is incredible," she gushed, taking a step towards me. "I can't believe it. We have to talk, you have to tell me everything." Her eyes were wide with a frantic, calculating energy. She was already seeing the possibilities, the status, the financial cushion I now represented. But I didn't play their game. I held up a hand, not unkindly, but with an air of finality that stopped her in her tracks. I turned my full attention to Ms. Albright, the venue manager, creating a deliberate bubble of professionalism that excluded them entirely. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice even. "What is the outstanding balance?" She told me the amount. I nodded. "And the payment from Mr. Chad's account has not arrived?" "No, sir," she confirmed. "Then the policy is clear. No payment, no event. You can begin informing the staff." Panic erupted. "No, wait!" Susan cried out, her voice thin and reedy. "It's just a simple bank delay. It's on its way." Robert was already fumbling for his phone, his face turning a blotchy red. "We'll cover it. Just give us a moment." It was only then that I turned to face them, my expression unreadable. I let my gaze drift over each of them, Robert's blustering panic, Susan's tearful pleading, Jessica's desperate, crumbling composure. "There seems to be some confusion," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the marble floor. "I was informed, quite clearly, that this was to be an event for elites only, and my daughter and I, you see, were deemed not to meet that standard, so we were uninvited." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "As the owner of this property, I respect the exclusivity you were trying to create. I have a certain standard to uphold myself. Since we weren't on your list, my wife, my daughter, and I made other plans." I glanced at my watch. "Please, feel free to use the space, assuming you can settle the bill. Sarah and I have a dinner reservation." And with that, I took Sarah's hand, turned my back on their stunned, horrified faces, and walked toward the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing me away from their world of illusion and leaving them alone in the wreckage of their own making. It wasn't a victory shouted from the rooftops, it was a quiet, firm closing of a door that I should have locked years ago. The immediate fallout was a digital tsunami of guilt, rage, and manipulation. We didn't stick around to watch the chaos unfold. Sarah and I went to our dinner reservation, and for the first time in a decade, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I didn't even realize I had been carrying. We didn't talk about her family. We talked about Lily, about the business, about our future. It felt like the first day of the rest of our lives. My phone started vibrating in my pocket around 8 o'clock that night. Then Sarah's phone started. We ignored them. When we got home, we found Lily watching a movie, blissfully unaware of the drama. She told us all about the helicopter ride, her eyes shining. Seeing her happy and safe was all the confirmation I needed that I had done the right thing. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked my phone. I had 17 missed calls from Robert, 9 from Susan, and a string of increasingly unhinged text messages from Jessica. The first few were apologetic. "Ethan, there's been a huge misunderstanding. Please call me." The next were angry. "How could you do this to me on my wedding day? You're trying to ruin my life." The final ones were just pure, unfiltered narcissism. "You made my wedding all about you. You're so selfish." The crown jewel, however, was a voicemail from my mother-in-law, Susan. It was a masterwork of emotional blackmail, her voice thick with fake tears. She wailed about how I had humiliated them, how I had deliberately orchestrated this to hurt Jessica, how family is supposed to support each other no matter what. "We've always treated you like a son," she cried, a statement so laughably false it made me chuckle. The next morning, my chosen family rallied around us. My best friend, Mark, who had been my confidant through years of family slights, showed up at our door with a box of donuts and a bottle of champagne. To the CEO, he toasted, who finally cashed in a decade's worth of karma. His presence was a grounding force, a reminder of what real friendship felt like. Sarah was magnificent. She became a firewall, fielding all the incoming calls from her family. She was calm, firm, and unyielding. To her mother's tears, she responded, "You brought this on yourselves. You disrespected my husband and my daughter. The consequences are yours to deal with." To her father's blustering attempts to smooth things over, she said, "There's nothing to smooth over, Dad. For the first time, Ethan and I are putting our family first. We're done." The support from the sympathetic relative, Sarah's Aunt Carol, came via text. "Heard what happened," it read. "Good for him. It's about time someone stood up to them." The vindication was sweet, but the real prize was the peace. The constant, low-grade stress of trying to win their approval was gone. For years, I had been playing a game I could never win. By finally walking off the field, I had won everything that mattered. The real-world consequences of my in-laws' lifestyle began to cascade far beyond a single ruined wedding day. Their entire existence was a carefully constructed house of cards, and I had just removed the foundational illusion that someone would always be there to bail them out. The wedding, which they had managed to salvage after a frantic, humiliating call to Chad's parents for the money, had been the final, extravagant expenditure they simply couldn't afford. Jessica and Chad had envisioned a life of sponsored travel and effortless luxury, but the reality was that Chad's trust fund was smaller than he'd let on, and Jessica's influencer career generated more free products than actual income. They had been counting on a generous gift from me, and when that didn't materialize, their financial situation became dire. About a month after the wedding, the inevitable call came. It was Robert, my father-in-law, and his tone was stripped of all its usual bluster. He sounded tired and defeated. After some awkward small talk, he got to the point. He explained that his own consulting business had taken a downturn and that the wedding costs had wiped out their savings. He asked, point blank, if I could loan them a significant sum of money. He didn't even try to create a flimsy pretext, it was a raw, desperate plea. I listened patiently until he was finished. "Robert," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I'm sorry to hear you're in a difficult position. But my money, the money I've worked for, is for my family's future. It's for Sarah, and it's for Lily's education and well-being. I can't help you." There was a long silence on his end before he quietly said goodbye and hung up. Saying no wasn't vindictive, it was a necessary boundary. It was the final brick in the wall I had built to protect my own family. The fallout for them was severe. Within 6 months, they were forced to sell the large family home that had been the backdrop for all their posturing. They downsized to a small condominium an hour outside the city. Jessica and Chad had to break the lease on their trendy downtown loft and move into a cramped apartment. The facade they had spent decades building had crumbled into dust, leaving them with the uncomfortable reality of their own choices. For me, this period was about healing. I channeled the energy I used to spend navigating their toxic dynamics into my own life. I took Lily on a father-daughter trip to see the national parks. I invested more time in my marriage, and Sarah and I rediscovered the easy, joyful connection that had first brought us together. I realized I had been subconsciously seeking their validation for years, believing that if I were just successful enough, good enough, they would finally see my worth. The truth was, my worth was never up for their debate. It was inherent. It was proven not by the money in my bank account, but by the love in my home, the integrity in my work, and the peace in my heart. Nearly a year passed. The silence from my in-laws was almost total, save for the occasional, passive-aggressive holiday card addressed only to Sarah. We had built a new, quieter life, free from their drama and expectations. Then one afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, small. "Ethan?" It's Jessica. I was so surprised I didn't respond for a moment. Her tone was completely different from the last time I'd heard it. The arrogance was gone, the entitlement stripped away. She sounded humbled. She stumbled through a few awkward pleasantries before getting to the point of her call. "Look," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I know it's late, but I wanted to apologize for everything." She took a shaky breath. "Living like this, having to actually budget and work for things, it's been hard. It's made me realize a lot. I was a horrible person to you. I was always so jealous of Sarah for having you, someone so steady and real, while I was always chasing after I don't even know what sparkle." I guess she paused. "The wedding thing was awful. I was so caught up in impressing people, in looking like I had this perfect, elite life, that I hurt the people who should have mattered most. I'm especially sorry for what we did to Lily. No kid should ever be made to feel like they're not good enough. It was unforgivable. It was a clumsy apology, imperfect and raw, but for the first time, it felt genuine. It wasn't a manipulation tactic or a means to an end. It sounded like the painful, honest words of someone who had been forced to finally look in the mirror. I didn't offer immediate, easy forgiveness. The wounds were too deep for that. "Jessica, I appreciate you calling and saying that," I said carefully. "It means something. But you have to understand that a lot of damage was done. Trust isn't a switch you can just flip back on." "I know," she whispered. "I don't expect anything. I had to say it after the call. I discussed it with Sarah. She was as shocked as I was. We decided, cautiously, to open the door just a crack. A few weeks later, we agreed to meet Jessica for coffee at a neutral cafe. There were no parents, no Chad, just the three of us. It was stilted and awkward, but it was a beginning. We laid out our boundaries clearly. Our relationship, if it were to be rebuilt at all, would be based on mutual respect. There would be no more financial entanglements, no more assumptions, and no more drama. She agreed to everything. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a tentative first step on a long road toward a new, healthier kind of family connection. Robert and Susan, we heard through the grapevine, remained bitter, unable to admit any wrongdoing. But for the first time, that didn't matter to me at all. Looking back on this entire journey, the single most important lesson I learned is that you cannot let other people define your value. For a decade, I allowed my in-laws' skewed perception of success to cast a shadow over my own life. I was the boring one, that safe one, the one who wasn't elite. I worked tirelessly in the background, not just in my career, but in their lives, hoping that one day my quiet competence and reliability would finally earn me a seat at their table. The ultimate irony is that when I finally built my own table, one far grander than they could have ever imagined, I realized I didn't want a seat at theirs anymore. Their definition of elite was a hollow performance. It was about designer labels, expensive venues, and the approval of strangers. It had nothing to do with character, integrity, or the quiet, difficult work of building something real and lasting. True wealth isn't about impressing people, it's about having the freedom to live authentically, to protect the people you love, and to find peace within yourself. Standing up to them wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-love. It was a declaration that my family, my wife and my daughter, was my priority, and I would not allow their toxicity to poison our well-being any longer. The confrontation at the wedding venue wasn't about flaunting my success, it was about holding up a mirror to their behavior. And sometimes, the reflection is a hard thing for people to see. My relationship with Sarah has never been stronger. We weathered the storm together and came out the other side as a true, unbreakable team. My daughter Lily saw her father refuse to be bullied, and I hope she carries that lesson with her always, that her worth is non-negotiable. My business continues to thrive, but my greatest success is the happy, peaceful home I come back to every night. I have a tentative, new relationship with my sister-in-law, one built on the fragile foundations of honesty and respect. As for my in-laws, they are living with the consequences of their choices. Perhaps one day they will understand, but my happiness is no longer contingent on that. I found my own power not when I made a lot of money, but when I decided I was enough, just as I was. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to define your own worth against the expectations of others, I want to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own strength.